Hi, and welcome back to Five Big Things for the Future of ESG. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, this series builds off of the Pocket Guide to Combat ESG Skeptics, a resource that we launched to help investors and practitioners integrate ESG frameworks in a way that makes sense. Each episode tackles one big shift that we believe will make ESG stronger and more decision useful, especially in today's economy. We've covered workers at the center, climate as a way to evaluate risk, materiality, and how smaller companies can integrate ESG frameworks. But today, we're talking about something that has arguably done the most amount of reputational damage to ESG and impact than any political backlash, and that's greenwashing. In the Pocket Guide, we're pretty candid about this. Greenwashing is real. According to research from 2023, 27% of over 700 public companies in 40 different countries were rated high or very high in greenwashing severity, despite publishing sustainability reports and releasing annual reports. And that statistic should concern anyone who takes risk management seriously. We have no shortage of frameworks, rules, and disclosure regimes. There are industry-specific standards, third-party ratings, and so much more. And yet, greenwashing persists. Our take is that part of that reason is that disclosure is too often treated as the end goal and not the starting point. That's why today we have the perfect person to lead us on a journey of shifting both the language and the purpose of measuring with meaning. Christina Leijonhufvud is the co-founder and CEO of BlueMark, the impact investing market's leading provider of impact market intelligence. She has spent the last 20 years working to professionalize and scale impact investing, first as a managing director at JP Morgan, where she launched the firm's first social finance business, and then as a co-founder of Tideline, and now at BlueMark. Christina, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Brahana.
It's always nice to see you, and it's always such a refreshing conversation because I think you do a very intentional job of speaking about this work with realism, but also an incredible amount of optimism. And I think that's some of what we are looking for right now. So in that spirit, I would love to start at the beginning. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're building and why you decided to build it?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me here. So first of all, BlueMark was founded in 2020, so right in the middle of COVID, spun out of consulting firm Tideline, which I co-founded, and it was expressly set up to combat exactly the topic that you're talking about on this particular episode, greenwashing and impact washing. So, in 2000, what we might call the sugar rush days for impact product, there was such a massive sort of proliferation of new products and funds in the market that one of the greatest concerns at the time was, how can we trust the claims that are being made by all of these new and emerging and even established managers in the field? And folks started coming to us at Tideline as, veterans in the field, I suppose, to help them evaluate the credibility and credentials of those products. And so we stood up BlueMark to provide independent assessments, verifications, and intelligence on what constitutes actually impact bona fides and quality, a quality approach to driving at impact through an investment strategy. But we didn't do so in order to sort of become the police or clamp down. Ultimately, I am a huge believer in the power of capitalism, the power of investment to drive towards a better world. And so what we want to do is sort of remove the friction that prevents folks from deploying more capital towards positive and veritable impact. And that was why we launched BlueMark, to provide both the verifications and the market intelligence and insights to facilitate more deployment of capital, not less. So after having conducted over 350 verifications on just about $500 billion of investment products across the globe, we have accumulated a lot of insights and understanding of what constitutes good, better, and best impact practice and performance. And on the back of that, we've launched a market intelligence platform called BlueMark IQ, which is a platform for asset allocators and asset managers to more efficiently exchange data and information on the impact in their portfolios so that, again, hopefully we can unlock more capital towards veritable impact. BlueMark IQ is seeking to address one of the sort of perennial challenges in our market, which is that of impact reporting and how do you actually begin to benchmark impact performance just in the same way you would financial performance. Um, LPs and asset owners complain that their managers report in all different formats and forms, some providing, a set of KPIs and metrics in a spreadsheet, and others providing a big glossy report with stories and photos. And they have no way of aggregating or comparing the contents or interpreting the quality of performance. And asset managers, in turn, complain that every asset owner or LP asks for something a little bit bespoke or different. And so we're trying to solve for that by creating this platform for information exchange in a structured and consistent environment.
One of the things that I think is so critical about the piece that you're building now is that there has historically been conflation, I think, between the inability to measure and the inability to compare. And we find this often when we're talking to clients. They sort of say, well, you can't measure in the first place, so sort of what are we doing here? And I think what you all are speaking to is that it's actually the latter issue. It's the lack of standardization. It's the lack of like actual comparable data that's really making it very hard to know whether an actual strategy manager asset is performing, which is a really important, I think, shift in the language. We need to move to the conversation about being, yes, you can measure. It's the comparison part that we're really trying to crack the nut on. I know that a lot of this work is sort of emerging as we speak, but I wonder if you could talk a little bit to like one or two things you've learned in the business of creating BlueMark IQ about the complexity of standardization, and if you could just sort of opine a little bit on where you think investors fall down when they get into that business. Where is there sort of cognitive dissonance between what it means to do this work and then actually to get to standardization and comparison?
Yeah. It's a really loaded question and a very good one. There are a lot of tools and platforms out there aiming to help collect standardized data. And we need some level of harmonization and standardization in terms of how we think about what constitutes um, a complete picture of impact, which is not simply KPIs and metrics alone. We do need some level of standardization in metrics and KPIs, but that won't take us the whole way when it comes to impact. I think, um, we're trying to walk the tightrope, I suppose, between creating something that is again more pragmatic um, and structured in a comparable way, but allowing still for the contextual data that's needed to interpret the quality of the metrics. So um, a set of KPIs alone won't tell you whether or not, there is both positive and negative impact, whether affected stakeholders' voice has been incorporated in those metrics, whether the metrics that have been chosen are material and relevant to the strategy or the objectives. Are they sufficiently ambitious? So I think where BlueMark brings a bit of a secret sauce is we've been verifying strategies all over the globe and interpreting all of those things to translate all of this morass of both quantitative and qualitative data into opinions and benchmarks that ultimately can be compared. So we're bringing sort of the quantitative and the qualitative data together in one home in a common structure so that it lends itself to interpretation on a common footing, if that makes sense. So it's not about standardized metrics alone. In fact, on BlueMark IQ, we're encouraging folks to select standardized metrics from standardized taxonomies like Iris Plus wherever possible, but we're also allowing them to create custom metrics. One of the interesting findings we had recently, looking at the data we've already collected on the platform across about 450 managers, is that there's about 22 different metrics for carbon emissions avoided alone.
Oh my God.
One of the areas where one would hope we have a little bit more uniformity, but there's a lot in the methodologies and assumptions behind getting to a GHG emissions avoided metric. And so we have a long way to go as a field.
Inherent in some of what you're saying, though, which I think is an important message, is that we also have to embrace the complexity. I mean, I think part of where we're falling down is that when we opt too much for standardization, that's where the greenwashing actually seeps in, because the things that you're measuring are actually not reflective at all of why you built the strategy. So not at all to put words in your mouth, but I think there's a clarion call here a little bit that I'm hearing that says, like, it's complicated. It's meant to be complicated. That complexity is the reason we all have a job, that this industry is still around, why we're all trying to
Yeah.
figure it out. Maybe to stay philosophical for a moment, in the Pocket Guide, we sort of acknowledge the frustration that investors feel with the complexity of this work. You know, multiple scoring systems, divergent methodologies, inconsistent correlations, standardized metrics, non-standardized metrics. But I also think it's true that greenwashing thrives in environments where ESG becomes performative, that the focus is on the publishing and the branding and sometimes even the scoring rather than embedding risk management into core operations. And I know that BlueMark is very intentional about these multiple layers of analysis, right? It's not just what the fund or the manager or the company does, it's also how decisions are made, how operations are captured, how risk is assessed. I wonder if you could talk a little, because you're dealing with both asset owners and asset managers, which is a very unique vantage point. Could you talk a little bit about how you guide folks on navigating the balance between saying something at all and saying something meaningful? What does that, I imagine that's a difficult conversation. What does that conversation look like when you're having it?
First of all, yes, I think we do have to embrace the complexity because let's face it, investing is a complex business at its root. It's not easy to make a good investment, even if you're not focused on impact, right? And then you layer on an impact motivation and holding yourselves accountable to that objective, and you've just made it a lot more complex. Also, interpreting the quality of an investment, even if you're not focusing on impact and you're just focusing on financial and operational risk and upside, is very complicated. I mean, if you've ever read a company's quarterly reports or annual report, I mean, it's why people publish pages and pages. It's
Right.
not as simple as a single metric, even though we rely on some of those headline metrics. So, I mean, I spent years as a risk manager on Wall Street, and had a career in that because it's not as simple as managing to a single metric. And so, we do run the risk in impact investing of falling into the trap of false precision and wanting to kind of
Yes.
identify what the most important one or two metrics are and sort of optimizing for that metric while ignoring all of the complexity that any investor should be focused on, regardless of whether or not they're an impact investor. Um, and so, in that light, we do, we do have really interesting discussions with our clients when we're engaging on, evaluating the quality of their practices and performance. I mean, we try and translate all that we know about the standards and metrics and taxonomies and frameworks into something practical and implementable, which does, um, translate into a set of protocols and processes. But we also want to avoid, you know, going so far down that road that it becomes, uh, just a set of bureaucratic, performative checklists, as you put it. So it's a real balancing act, and it's why, for example, when BlueMark undertakes a verification with a client, we're relying on our interviews of the investment team. We're relying on all of the documented evidence on their process and practice, but we're also looking at transactions and really trying to see how are investors holding to these principles and processes at a transaction, and how is that translating into actual real life impact. So it's trying to turn art into a bit of certainly a standardized process, if not a science.
I think we all find ourselves in a unique political moment, at least as it relates to sort of impacting ESG. And I think we've watched sort of ESG specifically go through just so many different sort of like manipulations and iterations since 2023. And it has, I think, at least from the outside looking in, it has felt very much that some of the attack on ESG has been an attack on disclosure. It feels like there's been punishment for the investors that have been at the leading edge of disclosing, opting for transparency, sharing the lessons that work, sharing the lessons that didn't work. And yet, one of the deep needs that BlueMark IQ fills is giving us an opportunity to turn that transparency into knowing something, eventually being able to compare. Given that that's so sort of central to the product that you all are rolling out, I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about whether you're seeing this backlash against disclosure really show up at all, really, in the work. Is it not really touching the investors and managers that were doing this already? Is it not really front of mind for them? Have you had to pivot at all? Because I think there are a lot of folks that will be watching this that find themselves at a similar crossroads where they're trying to figure out how to be field builders, but also protect themselves from this sort of very antagonistic political environment. So I would love if you could just touch on, how has disclosure changed or shown up, particularly as BlueMark IQ has come to market?
Yeah, great question. Well, there's no doubt we've lived through an arc of sort of, again, the sugar rush days
Yep.
where everyone's launching products. And frankly, there were some practitioners and players in the market slapping
Yes.
sustainability or impact labels onto products that were questionable,
Mm-hmm.
in their um, veritable intentions and accountability. And we've moved from an era of greenwashing and impact washing to an era of impact hushing. So we've seen that impact hushing take fold, particularly over the last, I would say, year or so,
Mm-hmm.
where folks in North America and the US in particular have become a bit more reticent
Mm-hmm.
um, to sort of voluntarily share um,
Mm-hmm.
information on their strategies as it relates to non-financial factors and impact objectives. But um, I will say, I think the roots of the attacks on ESG started well before the most recent, political administration in the US.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the attacks on the ESG market have been entirely legitimate. There
Mm-hmm.
were many years of complaints about black box ESG ratings, methodologies, and frankly, products in the market that ultimate retail investors um, could not possibly understand in terms of what they were getting. So I think there are a lot of retail portfolios that were stuffed with ESG and sustainability products, with investors who thought they might have been getting actual impact products. And so that mislabeling problem in a weird
Mm.
way, the silver lining of the backlash and how heightened it has become. The silver lining is that I think we've seen a lot of ESG and impact tourists leave the market. And, um, BlueMark's always been pretty centered in our purpose, and that is to drive more capital towards, intentional strategies to achieve positive social and environmental impact. And I will say that core part of the market has been quite resilient in this period. And I think that if anything, what I'm experiencing just in the last 6 months is that after a period of feeling kind of shell shocked and frozen, folks are reconnecting with their conviction, their purpose. This is a purpose-led movement, and they're getting on with life and their strategies. And frankly, because of the intentionality, the accountability towards their intentions is just one clear part of the strategy. It's not a nice to have; it's a need to have. And so, both from a verification and a reporting perspective, albeit in different jurisdictions, sometimes the reporting can be driven by mandated regulatory reporting, and in others more voluntary. But the US has always been a voluntary disclosure market, and frankly always led the world in some ways in terms of best
Mm.
practice. And so I'm seeing a return to core principles, and folks are just getting on with their strategies and the reporting on their strategies.
I have to agree. I mean, I think we've seen the same thing. I know it's something you and I have talked about, but I had zero anticipation that this year we would start to see an increase in at least in our case, families and individuals and private foundations that want to do this work. And it feels like the busiest it's ever been, which is really interesting because I think there is, to your point, I agree strongly that the silver lining of this backlash is that we have cut some of the fat, so to speak. And so it has been sort of actually an enhanced sophistication that's come out of that. And some of these families and individuals who have the ability to move, I actually think have taken on the mantle, have sort of said like, okay, if institutions are falling apart and if certain funds and grant making programs are going to come under the magnifying glass, we're going to use our independence, which is enshrined by not just the way the traditional markets here, but the SEC. We're going to use that and we're going to invest in whatever the heck we want. And
Yes.
here we come. And that's been cool to watch
Yeah,
because it has been, like you said, it's been sort of it hasn't been a continuation of retrenchment. It has been some leaders really coming out of the fold and saying, okay, well, watch us work and we're going to do that work.
I agree. I agree. It's been very encouraging to see that. And I think, again, the US market is fairly unique in terms of the level of kind of foundation and family office activity. And in some ways, in today's environment, there is a real premium placed on integrity,
Mm.
authenticity, trust. I mean, let's face it, we're in a period where people are losing faith and trust. Our
Yeah.
social contracts are being eroded on all levels. And so
Yes.
I think there is a counter movement afoot. It's been a bit of maybe there was a bit of a shell shock, delayed reaction, but
Mm.
seeing the surge of new mobilization and kind of resistance in a positive form, resistance in the form of let's be intentional, authentic, and accountable to what we're trying to do and build. That's who would have thought that's those features are actually revolutionary, but in today's world they feel it.
So if I were to come up with like a wish list, or let's say like a guidance list, for companies, investors who want to do this right, some of what I've heard you say is, and some of this is not, the Blue Mark's remit, but really the whole field. But I think that there seems to be some credence around truly interrogating underlying data, right? That we have to be informed investors and consumers. We can't just look at the labels. And that obviously brings with it complexity and time and money and all those things. Those are not lost on me. But I think the same way that we are discerning about what we put in our bodies or on our skin, there seems to be a additional sort of, and also where our money is. So there is opportunity, I think, for us all to interrogate the data a little bit more. I certainly think we need validation of those claims. That's why BlueMark is so important. That's why groups like BlueMark are so important, because we do need sort of experts to come in and say, okay, that's feeling real. That's feeling like the outcome matches the intention. I also think, and this doesn't get talked about as much, but I'm constantly reminding our clients that ultimately ESG is not an investment strategy, it's a framework. So if you're going to apply it in its true form, then you need to make operational and capital allocation decisions with those findings, which I think probably you and I could spend another hour on that, but I think that's an area where we
Yeah.
also need to translate that. What else would you, if you were adding to that wish list of like, an investor walks in and they're sort of saying like, how do I really like be a responsible investor in this space? What should I do besides interrogate the data and validate it and actually turn that into decision making? Is there anything else that you would add to that list? And if you want to push back on anything on that list, I'm more than welcome it. But is there anything that you would sort of add or tweak to that?
Well, I love the analogy to, how we think about the food we put into our bodies or the skincare we use and the safety and the healthiness of those things. When it comes to investments, I think a lot of end asset owners are intimidated by the language of finance,
Mhm.
and frankly, don't necessarily ask all the questions of, there are layers of gatekeepers in the finance industry. And so, in some respects, BlueMark with its verification and so on is both trying to serve the gatekeepers with BlueMark IQ to provide more digestible data and dashboards and information to their end clients, but also um, to provide a good housekeeping seal in a sense through our verifications. But I think that investors need to be really emboldened to challenge their advisors. I think that's just, and to shop their relationships when they don't feel that somebody's speaking in a language that speaks to them or is not taking their questions seriously. I think that is just one of the most fundamental hurdles that holds this movement back, honestly. So it's not just about interrogating the data, it's asking your service providers to provide you the service you deserve as an asset owner. Yeah, and I think that extends to kind of some, a wish list for more institutional asset owners. I think institutional LPs and asset owners um, need to work harder, I think, to harmonize their approaches to thinking about impact, um, due diligence and screening and monitoring and reporting to kind of start removing some of that friction and and barriers that exist. BlueMark has a strategic partnership with ILPA, the Institutional Limited Partners Association, which I think is a really great sign that ILPA was motivated to work with us. I think it shows that there is sort of budding and increasing demand amongst that global institutional LP membership base to advance practice. So we're seeing pockets of more sophistication in that LP base where they are actually asking more informed questions and
Mhm.
looking for better information and data, but we have more work to do, I think, on the harmonization front.
I think those are excellent additions and perhaps more attainable now than ever given that we've had this backlash, that there's been a message to the market that we can't just continue business as usual. You don't get the privilege of the labeling and the work without the cost, both human and physical and tech and moral. I'm trying to figure these things out. You can't have one without the other. I can't believe that we're already at time because, again, you and I could be doing this for hours, which is crazy. But we always want to end with this question because I think it's just important to just be almost myopic about what like success or victory looks like. So I want to ask you that. What proof points would you want to see to know that the work that BlueMark is doing, either through verification or BlueMark IQ, that it's really making a difference? What are some of the signals that you would look to the market to sort of send you to say, aha, we're on the right track? And I know you've seen some of them already, so feel free to add those in the mix.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Well, I mean, on the verification front, I'm very proud of what we've accomplished through hundreds of verifications right now. We're still early days. I think we need the network effects of more LPs engaging with the data and actually like working with their GPs and their managers over the platform to create longitudinal data, to create wherever possible more standardized data, more also compile it with qualitative data and commentary, and we're working on that. I think proof points will be more and more LPs saying this is really making our lives easier, and we're actually deploying more capital as a result of this toolkit.
I love that. I have a sneaky suspicion it's going to happen. I have a sneaky suspicion we're headed there. Christina, it's always a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for spending your time with us. Every time we chat, I feel like I learn. I always want to be taking notes because I feel like I learn so much. So thank you for spending this time with us and for chatting a little bit more about the work.
Thank you, Rahana. It's such a pleasure. And yeah, I'm thrilled to be a colleague with you in this market.
Thank you.